Please be seated. I think that one of the most memorable films I have ever seen is the 1962 Academy Award winner, The Miracle Worker. The movie, starring Anne Bancroft and Patty Duke, is based on the play by William Gibson, which tells the story, the true story, of Helen Keller. Born in 1880, Helen Keller lost her sight and hearing after suffering an illness at the age of 19 months. Almost 5 years later, 5 critical years for childhood development, a young and remarkable teacher by the name of Anne Sullivan came into Helen's life. The movie is so memorable for how vividly it depicts the extreme struggle that was necessary to bring about Helen's healing. Helen would never regain her eyesight or her hearing, but she didn't have to live in utter darkness and chaos. By the time she met Anne, Helen was not only severely limited by her blindness and deafness, but also, having lived with a family who loved her but did not know how to teach her, she had become a willful tyrant. Her healing would be a battle. So much so that the actors wore protective padding underneath their 19th century aprons and petticoats that they wore for the movie. They needed that padding so that they could wreck an entire dining room just to teach Helen how to eat from a plate with a spoon. The miracle worker showed me that miracles take work. Keller started to develop language by feeling objects and then associating those objects with words spelled out in her hand using finger signals. Then she learned to read sentences by feeling raised words on cardboard and learned to even make her own sentences by arranging words in a frame. She spent years learning Braille at the Perkins Institution, and then she began the slow process of learning to speak at the Horace Mann School for the Deaf in Boston. She even learned to lip read by placing her hands on the lips and throat of the speaker. Behind all of that was her tireless teacher, friend, and companion, Anne Sullivan. Through all of her efforts, Helen developed skills that others with similar abilities of her time never approached. She became a writer, writing many articles and books. She even was able to give lectures, inspiring people to give millions of dollars for the American Foundation for the Blind. Her extraordinary accomplishments improved treatment for the deaf and blind in American society and broke ground for new methods of educating people with these special needs. Apparently, it was Mark Twain who originally described Anne Sullivan as a miracle worker. I think Twain had it right. Helen Keller's life is a miracle. She was brought out of a dark and silent and powerless existence into a life of freedom and friendship and meaning. But I think Anne Sullivan would have told us that she wasn't the only one working that miracle. Take the examples from the Gospel of Mark today. We have 2 stories of healing. First, the Syrophoenician woman who fights with Jesus to advocate for her daughter's healing. Then we have the people who fight their way through the crowds to bring to Jesus their friend who is deaf and therefore unable to speak clearly. It's easy to read these two short paragraphs from the gospel and think that divine healing is accomplished easily enough through the magic words of Jesus, without the subjects of those healings having to do much at all. That interpretation of the miracles of Jesus leaves us with the idea that perhaps all we need to do to be healed, all that we need, is just plenty of prayer and passivity and patience. And eventually Jesus will show up and say those magic words and we will be healed. And we won't have to do anything hard. But I suspect that healing is actually much more difficult and complicated than that. And if we read the Gospel of Mark even just a little bit closer, we can see the struggle that it takes to get there. Consider the Syrophoenician woman, the courage that it took for her to leave her ailing daughter and seek out Jesus, even going so far as to interrupt him on his apparent beach retreat. Think about her humility and desperation as she kneels down and begs for help. Think of the discouragement that she must have felt upon hearing him tell her to wait her turn. And then consider the faith. Yes, the faith that she demonstrates when she insists that Jesus has plenty of grace to share and can share it right now. Thank you very much. Or perhaps the hardest part for her, trusting Jesus enough to walk out of that room when he has told her that her daughter has been healed. Most of the time we read this woman's story and we get caught up wondering about what Jesus is doing here. Is he grumpy because he's been disrupted? Is he testing her, perhaps? Does he need her to show him that it is time to include the Gentiles in his mission? There are still a lot of things that I wonder about Jesus in this story. But what I see clearly is that for the woman and her daughter, the struggle is part of their healing. Personally, I don't think that God requires our struggling as if we have to earn our healing, as if some of us deserve our healing because we've done things the right way and others of us don't deserve that healing. I just don't think that's God. But I do think that most of us really need the struggle. After all, there's no child without childbirth. Helen Keller wasn't going to learn about water without getting wet, nor about fire without getting burned. Healing isn't usually a gift that we passively receive. It's a hope that we stumble our way through the dark toward until we reach the light. And this is why it is so important that we notice what else is happening in these healing stories from the Gospel of Mark. These miracles don't just take work, they take teamwork. The Syrophoenician woman was there on behalf of her daughter. She was there to advocate for someone she loved. The deaf man was brought to Jesus by his friends because they were willing to fight through those crowds so that he could be healed. The best and truest miracles in this life are the things that we do with and for one another. It's when we work together for the well-being of others that the love of Christ is revealed and the good news is proclaimed. That is the miracle that we need. In the midst of so much bad news in the world, it is undeniable that we need healing. With climate change causing disasters at every turn, we need to seek the healing of this earth. As we fight off a pandemic greatly exacerbated by misinformation and obstinacy and greed, we need to seek the healing of our humanity. As our political battles escalate from stalemates to outrageous rhetoric and even to violence, it is becoming clear that we are losing our ability to hear one another and to listen to God. Like the hard of hearing, we seem to be compensating by increasing the volume. Until no one is listening, we are all just screaming. We need healing. We need prayer and patience, but we absolutely do not need passivity. The answer is in our willingness to work and our readiness to work with and for one another. Our struggle together toward God's love is the surest path to life. Helen Keller worked and struggled to attain a voice through which she could share her thoughts directly with the world. Speech was the most difficult, and though she developed a remarkable ability to speak with her own voice, she needed the help of an interpreter to make it clear for others. In 1954, with the assistance of a friend, Helen Keller miraculously said this to the world: "It is not blindness or deafness that bring me my darkest hours. It is the acute disappointment in not being able to speak normally. Longingly, I feel how much more good I may have done if I had only acquired normal speech. But out of this sorrowful experience, I understand more clearly all human striving, thwarted ambition, and the infinite capacity of hope." The infinite capacity of hope. That is precisely what enables us to continue to struggle our way toward healing. So keep the faith, my friends. Do not fear, but hope, so that we too may be miracle workers. Amen.